It's happening. It's happening. Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Chloe and this is the video that I have been so excited to film. Why haven't I filmed it? Because I haven't wanted to put real clothes on is like the real reason, if we're being completely honest. But we're here, we are clothed, and this is the video in which I share with you my top 10 favorite books of 2020. Please, if you're not already, take the time to subscribe to my channel below. What we are here to do today is for me to walk through, in no particular order, these are not ranked, my 10 most favorite, most loved books that I read in the fun that was 2020. But I will start off with The Marrow, Thieves by Cherie dimaline. Okay, Patty's coming to join us. Here we go. Now we're happy. Now we're happy. This was the first book that I read in 2020 and I started on a high note and holy crap, this freaking book. The Marrow Thieves is a YA dystopian about a not so distant world that has been absolutely ravaged by climate change, and white people, settlers, have lost the ability to dream, and the only way purportedly to regain the ability to dream is through the bone marrow of indigenous peoples. So in this book, we're following a group of indigenous people who are basically trying desperately to survive and to not get hunted for their bone marrow. This book just blew me away. Uniquely horrifying, and for a YA book is not afraid to kind of dig into like the horrors of climate change, of colonialism, the fact that it is a dystopian future that feels distinctly possible makes this like a really, really hard-hitting read. A story about resilience and the perseverance needed to keep on living in a world that doesn't want you to exist. I say that I have a complicated relationship with YA, and I think that that might be partially attributable to this having been the first book that I read in 2020 and it being a YA, and like there are so few things in the YA genre that I think can even hit close to this, because this is such a good book. Cherie dimaline is one of my favorite authors. Her other book, Empire of Wild, very nearly made it onto this list, but I felt like I had to pick one, and this is the one that I read first and the one that has like really, really stuck with me. You should just read this. I feel like this is gonna be this video, is me being like, here is like a half-baked synopsis. Please read this book. Next we have Darius the Great is Not Okay by Adib khorram. Speaking of amazing YA, I think that this is the only other YA that is on this list. Darius the Great is Not Okay is about a teenage boy named Darius. His mom is Persian Iranian and his dad is German American, and he's always had a really hard time fitting in. He struggles with depression. He takes medication for depression. This book has some of the best mental health representation that I've ever seen in a YA and just fiction more broadly. He doesn't have a ton of friends. He has a tough relationship with his dad. His mom's parents, who live in Iran, her dad becomes really sick and his family decides that they're going to go back to Iran to visit his grandfather, basically to say goodbye. And Darius has never been back to Iran, so him and his family make the trip. And while he's there, he develops this really special friendship with the boy next door to his grandparents named Sohrab, and it's basically Darius's like first friend that he's ever had. This book has so much heart, like tears are coming to my eyes just thinking about it, because the themes that it explores related to, like I said, mental health, related to tough but loving relationships with family members, with sort of culture and being kind of in between two cultures and not really knowing where you fit, of like really special and meaningful friendship and finding it in places that you might not expect. Fatness and body image. There's just like so much love and heart in this book that doesn't feel forced, that feels very natural. The writing is gorgeous. It's really funny. It's really tender. Darius has to be one of the fiction characters that I love the most in the world. Like, You just want to give him a hug. We don't know each other that well, but I think you should read it. The third book on this list, which is not going to be a surprise to a lot of people if you know me in real life, because I talk about it nonstop, and that is Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. I don't know if you've heard of this book. Everybody on booktube has read this. I read it a year late, sorry. Red, White, and Royal Blue is a new adult romance between the son of the President of the United States, the first woman President of the United States, and Prince Henry, who is the Prince of Wales in the UK. They very briefly at the beginning of the book have decided that they hate each other, and then they crash into one another literally at this fancy event, and it becomes photographed, and basically they are instructed by their respective PR teams to make it appear to the media as if they are friends, and that works so well that they begin to develop feelings for one another and fall in love. This is set, the backdrop is kind of this like political fiction drama. Some people don't like that backdrop. I really did enjoy that backdrop. I thought it was super fun. The romance in this is steamy. It's super sweet. The banter between these two characters is like some of the best that I've ever seen in a romance. The cast of characters in this book I absolutely adore. Both Alex and Henry have a sister and a really good friend, and the six of them kind of form this friendship group that I absolutely adore. This book is laugh out loud funny. It made me cry at multiple points, and one of my favorite things about this book is its representation of bisexuality. At the beginning of the book, Alex would consider himself straight, and when he discovers that he has feelings for Prince Henry, begins to grapple with and accept the label of bisexuality for himself. And there is like virtually no biphobia in this book, and the conflict that emerges is not like part of a coming out narrative. I mean, there are like elements of that, but that is not the main source of conflict in this book, which is one of the things that I love the most. I know there are people who this book is not for them, but I will take no negative opinions at this time, because this book is just like the book that makes me happy. Holy crap, I love this book. So that's that on that. Number 4 on this list is In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This is a memoir. Machado is writing her experience as a survivor of an abusive relationship with another woman and writing about this relationship. The dream house is the house in which they live together, and then you get these different vignettes depicting this relationship through different lenses. So dream house as choose your own adventure, dream house as this, dream house as that. This book is harrowing. Machado's writing is some of the most beautiful writing that I have absolutely ever encountered. It's really poetic in the way that it's written, and is something that will really ring true, I think, for folks who have experienced and survived abusive relationships. This book is incredible. It's received a lot of praise, rightfully so. One of the best and most uniquely written memoirs that I've ever read. Number 5 on my list, Jane, A Murder by Maggie Nelson. Jane tells the story of Maggie Nelson's Aunt Jane, who was murdered in the 1960s in Michigan, and the murder was unsolved. And at first when I picked up this book, I thought that it was going to be like a true crime type book, and I couldn't have been more wrong, but I'm really glad that I was. This is sort of told in verse. Maggie Nelson, if you have not encountered her writing before, is really poetic, and basically explores the murder of her aunt, the impacts that that's had on her decades later, the effects that that's had on the rest of her family. Nelson actually incorporates elements from Jane's journals. She was a really beautiful and prolific writer as well, and kept journals, and Nelson weaves in elements from her journals from a really young age, talking about her hopes, talking about her dreams. Tells a story that I think you don't really expect poetry or this form of writing to be able to do, but does it so impactfully. I read this in one sitting. It is short. The thing that like hits me so hard about Maggie Nelson's writing, this is the second book that I've read by her. Her writing is a gift, and the fact that there is a person who exists on this planet who can write this way, and we are permitted and graced with that writing, I think is just like amazing. I think it's amazing. True crime meets psychological exploration meets poetry. If that sounds like it might be your jam, it probably is. This is a really special book, and I am really, really glad that it found its way to me, even though it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. Number 6 on this list, which is actually the last book that I read in 2020, so you may have caught it in my December wrap-up video. That is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. Mexican Gothic follows our main character, Noemi, who is a socialite and aspiring anthropologist. Her and her dad receive a letter in the mail one day from her newly married cousin, Catalina, who basically says in this very frantic, very disjointed letter that she is seeing ghosts in her husband's house that she has moved into, and also that her husband is trying to poison her. Noemi's father sends her off to visit Catalina to see what's going on. Noemi goes to this house. Things get very, very dark and very, very strange. The family has a very, very dark past that lends itself to the book having a very strong colonial critique. There are elements of speculative fiction that have to do with fungus. Yeah, things just kind of like happen, and I'm not going to tell you anymore. The vibes and the setting were just doing so much for me that I knew that this was going to be an all-time favorite. The house really becomes kind of a character of its own in this book in many ways, and kind of just the unsettled feeling that you get and the sense of disgust and of rot, you know, those pleasant feelings that you love to seek out in a book, those were really there for me, and I really appreciated and respected that. And I just thought it was a really good, really gross old time. Number 7, I'm kind of cheating because I'm putting 2 books in one. Son of a Trickster and Trickster Drift by Eden Robinson. The Trickster series follow a teenage boy named Jared. He is First Nations, living in like remote, I think, northern British Columbia, and basically has a really tough life in many ways. His mom struggles with alcohol and drug use. She's got a really crappy boyfriend who is really horrible to Jared. His dog dies. He's got this massive crush on the girl who lives next door. And then one day, a raven, like a bird, starts speaking to him, and he's like, holy crap, what's happening to me? Why are birds speaking to me, you know? Basically, what is happening is Jared is the son of a trickster, as the title would imply, who is this kind of like shape-shifting creature in some indigenous cultures. I find it really hard to like synopsize these books because they're also kind of just really out there in a lot of ways, and I think that you kind of just have to dive in and like let it take you for a ride. You get magical fireflies, you get ghosts, you get cannibalistic otters, and like none of it seems to not make sense. Like you just read it and you're like, that's weird, sounds good. And really you're just kind of following this like coming of age story of Jared, who has flaws. He's got a lot going on, but I think is easily one of my favorite fictional characters of all time, and all you want is the best for Jared. I don't feel like I can actually tell you more about these books. I really love the way that they kind of bring together the a little bit chaotic life of a teenager in with these characters and stories and legends and traditions from First Nations cultures. These are great. I've got to stretch because I've got this dog on my lap. Number 8 is They Said This Would Be Fun, Race, Campus Life, and Growing Up by Eternity Martis. This is a memoir she is writing, sharing her account of being a Black woman studying for her undergraduate degree at a Canadian university, and weaving together anecdotes and her own personal stories and personal experiences with statistics, with case studies, to kind of bring together that kind of personal level and more systemic piece in a really impactful and really compelling and really informative way. The writing, again, I'm gonna just keep telling you that I think the writing in books that I like is really good, but I think that the writing in this book is really good, really, really accessible. For me, as someone who lives in Canada and is not too far out of university, the university that Eternity Martis went to, I have lots and lots of friends who went to that school. I think that a book like this is obviously super important. I think it's really, really important in the context of it being set in Canada. And I think that Canadians often really enjoy perpetuating this notion of Canada as this like racial utopia where racism and sexism and all of these different forms of oppression do not exist here, or do not exist to the same severity as they do in, for instance, the United States. Eternity Martis takes that perception and she's like, no, and she just tears it to a million pieces. So I thought that this was like expertly done, really readable, really accessible, really impactful, but the fact that it is a story that occurs specifically in the Canadian context made it a new favorite for me and something that I have been and will continue to recommend widely. Number 9 is one that I went back and forth about including it on this list and ultimately realized that I needed to include it on this list because I literally have not stopped thinking about it since I read it, and that is When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. This was a super highly anticipated read for me. It is a psychological thriller about a Black woman who grew up in a neighborhood in Brooklyn. She briefly moved out of that neighborhood and moves back and is seeing some really strange things happening that is basically like gentrification on steroids. Her Black neighbors are moving out seemingly really quickly, but they're doing it without telling people, and all of a sudden these new white families are moving in and businesses are changing and Uber drivers are getting creepier, and she enlists her neighbor Theo, who is this like fairly obnoxious white dude, to basically help her kind of figure out what's going on. There are people that I know who think that the ending happened too quickly. The character of Theo is kind of a strange tool, but regardless of these things, this book just did it for me. I thought it was deeply disturbing. Crafting a horror thriller around gentrification is genius, and I thought the idea was so good, and I really did like the way that it was carried out. Kind of similar to other books on this list, like Mexican Gothic, like the Marrow, Thieves, have these kind of sinister elements that are drawing from real life instances of inequality or oppression. I find that really horrifying because that feels more real to me sometimes than this like really intricate or hard to imagine murder plot. I originally gave it 4.5 stars, and then again, the more that I thought about it, I was like, no, I can't stop thinking about it. It's burrowed its way into my brain, so it's a 5-star book, and it is a favorite. The last, the final, the 10th book that is on this list is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. The Midnight Library follows our main character named Nora, who is having a tough time. She struggles with depression. Her cat has been killed. She is fired from her job. There's just like a lot of things that come to a head one day, and she attempts to take her own life, and in doing so is transported to a place called the Midnight Library, which is kind of between life and death, and she is encouraged to read books in the library, which basically allow her to relive her life multiple times had she made different decisions that years later she has found herself regretting. So she goes through living her life as a professional swimmer, as a rock star, as someone who married a man that she broke up with, all of these different kind of strands of her life. This book has been getting a lot of attention lately. It is a fairly new release. There are other books that kind of do this like time travel-esque trope differently, and maybe some would say more impactfully. I think the thing about this book that really made it a personal favorite for me was less of the kind of novelty of getting to like live multiple lives and more around the themes related to what it means to quote unquote live your best life and the impacts of living with regret. These are things that I think about a lot. There are things that have brought me in my life, I think, a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety and often a lot of guilt. And this book grapples a lot with those themes. How valuable is it to live with regret? And really about kind of appreciating the life that you've got. That, I think, is what made it, for me, a book that I really adored and found really meaningful and moving. And that won't make it a favorite for everybody. That might not resonate as much with some people, but for me it really did. I don't know if I've done a good job at synopsizing the books that I've discussed here today, but I hope that I have, and I hope more than anything that you can see how much I love these books and that you are maybe considering picking one of them up yourself. I would love it, again, if you clicked subscribe and stuck around. I'd love to hear if you've read any of these books, what your thoughts have been, if they've maybe been a favorite for you. And I would also love to hear what your top 1, 2, 3, however many favorite books of 2020 were. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you have a fantastic day and a fantastic start to 2021. I will see you very, very soon for the next video. Bye.